All right, hello. This is a continuation of my summary of my analysis on how the USA is starting a new Cold War with Russia. And we're focusing on the Industrial Revolution, in particular, how the Industrial Revolution made warfare very profitable in terms of military industry. And to understand the Industrial Revolution, we're examining it in 8 stages. We've gone through 5 already. First stage is the machine production of textiles, and then the second stage was the use of machines in agriculture, about 1830s, and then we examined the use of machines for printing, resulting in mass media, and that resulting in the increased capacity for propaganda, first employed to whip up and manufacture patriotism slash nationalism, and then communism, both of which had big impact on the 20th century. Uh, then the third stage of the Industrial Revolution was steam engines, the use to power machines, and especially for mechanized transportation, which allowed for the development of mercantilism into more colonialism, allowing access to the interior of countries, allowing for an upstream integration, and this resulting in increased colonial competition between nations, which led to mutually antagonistic autarkic trading blocs, which were a big recipe for war. World War One, World War Two, and even the Cold War. And then the fourth stage was the application of machines to make weapons, and this resulted in the formation of the American system of manufacturing, which culminated in the assembly line by towards the end of the 19th century. Right now, the machine manufactured arms came too late to have an impact upon the Crimean War. However, it did have a big impact upon the U.S. Civil War. However, the big effect of the Civil War was in it unleashing Western expansion economics for the United States. It just unleashed it. So after the Civil War, there was a massive surge of the USA towards the West, where we settled around 60% of our continent within the next 25 years. Right? So it was a rapid expansion into the West. And this drove the economy. It was the economic engine. And then how the crash of Western expansion uh, resulted in U.S. Um, expansion into Asia, right, with the Spanish American War. All right. And so, yeah, we talked about the 1893 Depression and how that increased U.S. imperialism. I mean, that had already begun going south into Mexico and into the Caribbean and into Central America. But the big jump into Asia occurred with the Spanish American War. And we talked about this period between 1873 to about 1911 or so as a time when Western expansion occurred in the U.S., but it was also the time of the Long Depression in Europe. And this increased urgency among the industrial nations for colonial competition, and that resulting in increased economic nationalism was a big factor leading to World War One. And then we examined all the factors that led to World War One. All right. So now we're going to focus on World War One and its impact. All right. So the effects of World War One on the USA: one, key Americans, powerful Americans, made mountains of money off of the war. Right. The USA flipped from being a big debtor nation. We were a perennial debtor nation, and we became a big creditor nation. It was a 180 flip, largely due to this massive exports. World War One massive exports right here. This big spike, right? The only one that comes close is World War Two, right? Other than that, we have a negative balance of trade deficit here, mostly. All right. And then the financial center of the world shifted from London to New York City. All right. The big British and French debt to USA got Britain and France to demand war reparations from Germany, which then became a big factor in the rise of Hitler and the Nazi Party, which then, of course, they gave us World War II. Hitler was the guy who gave us World War II. Big increase in. Oh, by the way, we're going to see how the U.S. power elite played a big factor in World War II as well, by supporting Hitler and the Nazi Party, and by supporting Germany rearmament, helping build up their war industries. And then there was a big increase in capital exports. All right, and this resulted in increase in U.S. neo-colonial control of foreign economies, foreign resources, and then this increased the need for military interventions, supported by the Roosevelt Corollary, which said, "Hey, we've reserved the right to intervene wherever the hell we want, whenever the hell we want," and that resulted in an increase in banana wars. Right. But the main focus today is going to be on the rise of the U.S. military-industrial complex. Right. So, World War One and the birth of USA's military-industrial complex. All right. When you think of the military-industrial complex, a lot of people think, Cold War, you know, uh, capitalist versus communist era. However, the military industrial complex goes back at least as far as World War One. Remember, we said that the fourth stage of the Industrial Revolution, which was machine manufactured weapons, which were perfected pretty much between 1820 and 1850 or so, right? This made the military industrial complex possible. However, the U.S. military industrial complex did not manifest until World War One. Right. So the term military industrial complex was coined by President Eisenhower in his January 17th, 1961 farewell address to the nation, in which he warned the American public. He said, quote, "In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military industrial complex. The potential for disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist." Right? Well, this really developed in World War One, and um, one of the guys who was a major contributor to this understanding was C. Wright Mills, a sociologist. Right? He outlined the military-industrial complex. This is basically his outline. All right, and he also wrote a book on the U.S. power elite. And the U.S. power elite are the guys who really run the military-industrial complex. So they're one and the same. This was a separate book, though. However, I used to own this book. I don't know what happened to it. Uh, all right. So what he said the military-industrial complex is a three-part thing. You have the military, you have the federal government, and you have military industry. And I believe C. Wright Mills was slightly off. He said the power elite pretty much dominates all three areas, right? Military, federal government, military industry. Um, I don't believe that's necessarily so. I think the main thing here is the power elite dominates the federal government. All right, they get the presidency. They get. It's not just the presidency. It's not just elected officials, right? Senators and congressmen, but primarily the federal government, which is presidency, right? But also career bureaucrats, key important positions in government bureaucracy, which you'll see down here. I'll show you real historical examples down here. All right, so that's the federal government part. The government part, it's federal government, the presidency, because the presidency holds primary foreign policy power, right? But also key elected officials, and often they're more important. All right. Now, as far as the military, I don't believe the power elite have to dominate the military, because the military is subordinate to the federal government, all right? But it's important that the power elite have their claws in intelligence agencies. Director of the CIA, director of FBI, director of DIA, so forth. Okay? NSA. All right. So, control of intelligence agencies is important, especially in control of the formation and public release of intelligence reports. This is a key means of manipulating the population in the war, right? So whenever you see an intelligence report from the CIA or DIA, NSA, whatever, being released, right, that should raise warning flags, right? Alarm bells should go off. Why the hell are they doing this, right? It's not to educate the public. It's to manipulate the public. They're not trying to do you a service. They're trying to play you, right? So whenever the government comes out with releasing intelligence reports, always be cautious. That should raise alarm, right? All right. Now, another aspect that they control is LOGCAP. That stands for Logistics Civilian Augmentation Program. That is military logistics, Army logistics, Navy logistics, Marine Corps logistics, all logistics. Okay? That's all been privatized. It used to be almost 100% U.S. military. Now it's almost 100% privatized. A big profit potential here. A big source of corruption, graft, waste, and abuse here. Fraud here. It's huge capacity here. And then another new development is privatization of war fighting, right? Through crap mercenaries. This stands for private military security contractors. They're mercenaries, right? Which throughout history have been shit. Shit performance. Right? I'm not going to explain all the reasons why. That's a whole separate lesson, maybe a 2-hour lecture. And then controlling reconstruction contracts. And then controlling resources wherever you go and dominate. Whether it's oil, minerals, whatever. Right? And then big profits made off the military industry. Now, the key is the ability to start wars and manufacture conflict. All right? So the key power there is in the federal government. And I'll explain why the federal government, and to a far lesser extent, the legislative body, is key to this. All right? I'll explain that in this diagram down here once I get to that. Right? Now, people are going to say, oh, the USA is a peace-loving nation. The USA doesn't start wars. My ass. In recent history, there's no bigger warmonger nation. Right? If you look at our history objectively, the USA is a huge, monstrous warmonger nation. We fight a shitload of wars. 2.77 wars every damn year of our existence, on average. So I say the key is to gain control of the government, especially the federal government, because then you control policy, right? In particular, you control foreign policy, which the primary power lies in the presidency, the executive branch, right? Then you can start wars, right? And I'm going to show you how you don't have to have a declaration of war. All you need is a congressional resolution, all right? And how Congress can be manipulated into congressional resolutions all the time. And then you control contracts, where the money flows, where the resources flow, where collective resources flow, where tax revenues flow. All right? And if you control those corporations that control these, for example, Halliburton, KBR, Bechtel, Carlyle, Brown Brothers Harriman Bank, you tap big profits. All right. So we're going to examine this diagram today. We'll review this a little bit, and we'll save this for another lecture because it'll be too much. We'll make a separate lecture here. This is an elaboration on the power elite. So this diagram shows the U.S. power elite, and as an introduction, I say, these guys come from the same interconnected families. They're childhood friends. They intermarry. They have the same banks, corporations, investments. They go to the same schools, and they are members of the same clubs, like the famous Bonesman Club. Right? Now, when I say Bonesman, a lot of simple-minded retards will immediately say, conspiracy theory, conspiracy theory, conspiracy theory. Because they watch some stupid movie on Bonesman. Right? No, it's not a stupid conspiracy theory. It's a power club. I mean, that's all it is. It's a group. Groups exist. People form groups. Group formation is a huge part of sociological analysis. All right? It's a fact. It happens. Conspiracy theory. I hate retards who say conspiracy theory because they can't even define it in a sentence, yet it dominates their full perception. You ask them to define it, and they have trouble defining it in one sentence, and that explains everything to them. A nebulous, vague, ill-formed, wacko notion. Now, the bonesmen I have in gray here, so whenever you see gray, these guys are all bonesmen. Okay? Key players in starting our wars. And you see how they dominate the starting of wars in the 20th and 21st century. All right, so first thing I want to look at is World War I. It's the start of the military-industrial complex, and mountains of wealth were made off this war from weapons production and sales, right? And really any war material. Anything that is profitable during war, right? Including food, right? Remember we said how the U.S. economy and Western expansion boomed as a result of the Crimean War and export of agricultural goods to support that war. It's not just weapons and bullets and shells, whatever. All right. Now, Key members were on the War Industries Board, right? Samuel P. Bush, father of Prescott Bush, father of George H.W. Bush, who was father of George W. Bush, right? Bush, 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 Bush. Fucking Bushes. Robert S. Lovett, father of Robert A. Lovett, who was the architect of the Cold War. John Foster Dulles. Now, he wasn't on the War Industry Board, but he was a lawyer for the board. All right. And he was sole managing partner for Sullivan Cromwell, the multinational corporation empire builder that conducted neo-colonialism. And also, it was a law firm for Brown Brothers Harriman Bank and Bush's Union Banking Corporation. And then other key guys were Bernard Brooke. I think he was a chairman or the head of the War Industries Board. And his next in line was Clarence Dillon, right? One kind of it's just a unique factor. I'm not saying much about this, but a common denominator here is they're all associates with E.H. Harriman, the big railroad tycoon and father of Averill Harriman, who I consider to be the linchpin of this military-industrial complex with his bank, Brown Brothers Harriman Bank. All right, so all these guys here, bonesmen, right, except for Morel Delano and Thatcher Brown, right? All these guys are bonesmen, and all these guys were the original founding partners of Brown Brothers Harriman Bank. All right. Actually, Brown Brothers Harriman Bank was a combination of Brown Brothers Bank, which was a big multinational corporation funding bank that supported neo-colonialism in the 19th century, and W.A. Harriman Bank. So they merged together, I believe, in 1929 or 1930 or so, forming Brown Brothers Harriman Bank. All right. Thatcher Brown being a relative to the original founders of Brown Brothers. Okay, so all these guys were partners in Brown Brothers Harriman Bank. Now, this bank is important because, one, it is the oldest and largest private investment bank in the USA, and two, during the 1930s, it financed Hitler and the Nazi Party and helped build Nazi war machines, along with Prescott Bush's Union Banking Corporation. Right? Both of these banks financed Hitler, Nazi Party, Nazi war industries. Right? And after we went to war with Germany, right? After Pearl Harbor, we went to war with Germany. Right? 4 Bush Harriman corporations, including banks, steel forgeries, and mining companies, all continued their German operations until November 1942, when FDR shut them down. All right. FDR, as far as I know, was a decent guy. He's my favorite president because of his strategic brilliance. Right. Now, FDR was a connected guy as well. In fact, he's related to 12 presidents. 12 U.S. presidents are related to FDR either through direct lineage or through marriage. Right? And he's related to this guy. Remember Franklin Delano Roosevelt? Well, here's a Delano here. Right? All these guys are power families. They're all connected. Now, 2 other companies that were notorious for supporting the Nazis were ITT, International Telephone Telegraph, and Ford Motor Company, right? And Ford was a big fascist Nazi supporter of Hitler and the Nazi Party. So I say Brown Brothers Harriman Bank and Sullivan Cromwell were big proponents of multinational corporations which conducted neo-colonial exploitation all of these foreign countries, all third world nations, and basically they conducted this. Do you remember I showed you this? Colonialism, how you conquered inland territory, you install a dictator, you leverage concessions, you then control resources, right? You control their economy, you establish the currency, you control the currency, you impose taxes, and you leverage labor, develop some manufacturing, you control import and distribution markets, you build transportation infrastructure, and you control urban infrastructure, trains, trolleys, roads, electricity, water, sewage, communications, banks, right? Through all this, you squeeze every damn penny out of the country, which leaves them in desperate poverty, right? Which leaves them in dependency. And then they get all pissed off. And that's fueled by commie ideology. Leninist communist ideology said, yeah, that's exactly what they're doing. And that's exactly what they did do. So that gave us wars of colonial independence, which were the hot part of the Cold War. The Cold War was between the USA and Soviet Union, but the hot part of that were all fought in these third world countries. That's where all the bleeding was done during the Cold War. All right. So yeah, Brown Brothers Harriman Bank, Sullivan Cromwell Law Firm, right? Big part of that. So they gave us World War II. Well, they played a role. Hitler played a big role, of course. Bastard, right? But power elite supported Hitler. These guys backed Hitler. They financed Hitler. Right? They also gave us the Cold War. In part. The hot part of the Cold War. Alright. So, Sullivan Cromwell. This was the law firm established by two guys, Sullivan and Cromwell. Alright. I mentioned Cromwell recently when he was a key guy trying to gain the Panama Canal concession from Colombia, right? The canal zone from Colombia. And when that failed, we overthrew, we conducted a revolution in Panama, and they broke away, and we got the Panama Canal zone, right? Well, that's only throughout Latin America. Sullivan Cromwell was the key multinational corporation, empire building, negotiating concession contracts with dictators who we propped up throughout Latin America. Then John Foster Dulles became the sole managing partner for Sullivan Cromwell Law Firm. Then he became Secretary of State under Eisenhower. And his brother was a big stock owner of United Fruit, right? And he became director of the CIA. All right. So these two guys together here, they pushed a lot of Cold War stuff. The Iran coup, overthrew the Iran government. Iran democracy overthrown, installed a dictator, the Shah. Guatemala coup, overthrew Arbenz and Guatemala democracy, installed dictators, bloody dictators for 35 years, right? And talking about the Guatemala coup, these guys were big stock owners of United Fruit, all right? United Fruit. And United Fruit, that's an example of this. They did all of this. They controlled 40% of the land. They controlled fruit production, banana production. They controlled taxes. They controlled the import market. They controlled the port. They controlled trains, trolleys, roads, electricity, communications. Right? So that is a real example. United Fruit right there. controlled by the power elite, right? Helping fuel communism. All right, last thing about the Dulles brothers is they were nephews for Robert Lansing. Robert Lansing was the architect of U.S. involvement in World War I. He was Secretary of State under Wilson, and he conducted the key things to help get us into World War I, including setting up the damn Lusitania thing, right? You know, he's the one who wrote the diplomatic communication rejecting Germany's request to issue a warning for Americans not to take transit upon the Lusitania. And I read his memoirs. He bragged about that, how clever and brilliant it was, right? How he wrote that communication for public consumption. And damn if he did not release that to the press. That's exactly what he said in his memoirs. I wrote that for public consumption, right? He was a key guy in structuring U.S. arms sales to Britain and France. We sold Britain and France 50% or greater weapons than they made for themselves, combined. Right? That was his big export. Right? Big money maker. Huge mountains of wealth made from World War I. Lansing. Right? And then, of course, our one-sided trade with Britain and France, right, finally got Germany to say, well, hell, we're in such bad shape. We're in crisis situation by 1917 that they declared unrestricted submarine warfare in the U.S. to sink those ships coming across, bringing in weapons and munitions to kill German boys. They resisted doing that for almost 2.5 years because they didn't want to go to war with USA, but they got desperate and said, screw it, we got to do this finally, right? And that's how we got into World War I. So these suckers got us into World War I. All right, where are we at here? All right, now Jay, Robert Lovett. He was a founding partner of Brown Brothers Harriman Bank. There he is, Robert Lovett, right? He's son of Robert S. Lovett. Robert S. Lovett ran the Union Pacific Railroad. That's E.H. Harriman's railroad. He's father of Averill, the key linchpin for the military-industrial complex. Robert Lovett was the architect of the Cold War, the key guy getting us the Cold War. Robert Lovett was also a mentor for McGeorge Bundy, another friggin' bonesman. All these friggin' bonesmen, right? McGeorge Bundy was a key architect of the Vietnam War. He wrote the 30-day plan which set up the Gulf of Tonkin incident, right? And his brother William Bundy helped out. He was Assistant Secretary of State. So that gave us the Vietnam War. I taught you the Gulf of Tonkin manipulation and the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. The key guy, I believe, in my opinion, was Averill Harriman. Big power player. Ambassador to the USSR during World War II. Right? Hobnobbing. I mean, you see him at Yalta, side by side with Churchill, Roosevelt, Stalin. Right? He offered his assistance to Kennedy when Kennedy came into office, right? And he served as Assistant Secretary of State for Far East Affairs. That's Vietnam. And then he was acting Secretary of State leading up to the Gulf of Tonkin incident. Now, according to this Colonel William Corson, U.S. Marine Corps, by 1963, Harriman was running, quote, Vietnam without consulting the president or the attorney general. So the president at that time was JFK. He was assassinated in November of 63. Robert F. Kennedy was his attorney general. All right. Now, I've read every damn document in foreign relations of the United States in 2 volumes, 1963 and 1964. Every damn document. I did this back in 1993 or so. 93, 94. I did research on the Vietnam War. Gulf of Tonkin back then. Right? Averell Harriman was at the center. He was a key player. For example, he was a key player in the Diem coup. And it's my opinion that he took JFK for a ride. Right? So he was a key player in getting us the Vietnam War. Now, the Vietnam War, as far as being a big money maker, right, was a big money maker for Root Brown Corporation, which later became Halliburton. Now, Root Brown was a big financial supporter, was a key financial supporter for LBJ's political campaign. And of course, you know, LBJ became president after Kennedy was assassinated, right? So big campaign supporter of RS. All right. Now, another bonesman is George H.W. Bush. Okay. This is Bush number 1. Bush number 1 gave us the first Gulf War. I taught you how it wasn't so simple as Saddam Hussein simply wanting to get Kuwaiti oil. Right? Yeah, he did. Saddam was a bastard. But he was a sucker. He was suckered into this. I taught you the whole William Webster manipulation. And then I taught you the 3 green lights. I'm not going to review that. If you don't remember that, I can't teach it all over again. Right? So they got us the first Gulf War. Right? Now, who was Bush? Bush was a former director of the CIA. He was also an oil expert, right? And if you recall, I don't know, most people don't recall very much, but I taught you how I read every damn article in the New York Times on OPEC between about 1990 to about 2003. Every damn article on OPEC. Right, and during the first Gulf War, all the oil experts, all the economists were saying the Gulf War is going to destroy OPEC. It's going to give control of oil price to the U.S., right? It's going to destroy OPEC, and the key is going to be Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, right? Major debt is going to leverage them, and it's going to destroy OPEC. And sure enough, OPEC was destroyed for almost a full decade. 9 years, OPEC was flat on its back after the first Gulf War. Perfectly predicted, and it perfectly became true. Right? So, as director of the CIA and as an oil expert, he would know that. All right. And so what did Bush do? During the first Gulf War, he got Saudis to pay $36 billion for the U.S. cost of the war. Of the $60 billion cost for the war, he got the Saudis pay 60% of it, $36 billion. Plus, the Saudis made big war purchases after the war. Plus, they had big bills for the war themselves. That gave them massive debt. Debt is a weapon. Debt is leverage. And that busted OPEC. I'm not going to explain how, but that busted OPEC unity for a full decade. 9 years. And that brought oil prices falling oil prices during that decade when oil prices should have been soaring, with emerging Asian economies and with the fall of the Soviet Union causing oil production out of Russia to cut in half. Oil prices should have soared, but they fell due to OPEC's fall. All right. Now, another key development of the first Gulf War was the first Gulf War was the first big log cap war. Right, the first war in which logistics was supplied by private corporations. The privatization of logistics. All right, log cap. Halliburton got the big contract. Right. Now, Halliburton came from Root Brown. Root Brown developed it to Halliburton. And Halliburton is owned by Dresser Industries. And Prescott Bush was a director of Dresser Industries. Neil Mallon was a CEO of Dresser Industries. All these bonesmen controlling Dresser Industries. George H.W. Bush worked for Dresser Industries. Right? Dresser Industries is owned by Brown Brothers Harriman Bank. Prescott Bush's Union Banking Corporation. Both these banks supported the Nazis. And all these bonesmen are partners of Brown Brothers Harriman. The bonesmen dominate Brown Brothers Harriman Bank. Except for two. And these are connected guys. One of the Browns, related to the Brown brothers. A Delano, related to FDR. All right. Now, during the first Gulf War, the Secretary of Defense was Dick Cheney. He's the guy that's doling out the contracts to Halliburton. He's lining Halliburton's pockets. No bid contracts left and right. Super expensive, big money makers. Billions of dollars going to Halliburton. Well, after the first Gulf War, he's made CEO of Halliburton. That's his attaboy. That's his payback. And then he became vice president under George W. Bush. All right? And as vice president, he was an asshole who kept screaming, Iraq did 9/11, Iraq did 9/11, when there's no evidence of it. He kept blabbing it on Meet the Press. Any damn news station. He's blabbing, Iraq did 9/11. Bullshit. Right? Now, 9/11 and the war on terror was a direct outgrowth of the first Gulf War. So the first Gulf War was a cause of 9/11. All right? Now, most people say, what? That not be true. It was Bin Laden. Yeah, I know it was Bin Laden. But if you read Bin Laden's speeches and writings, and I read a whole damn book of them, he kept saying the same 6 reasons over and over again why he's pissed at the U.S. And 5 of them were a direct outcome of the first Gulf War, including the death of 567,000 Iraqi kids killed as a result of the sanctions, which were a result of the first Gulf War. Right? The only one of the 6 reasons, Bin Laden reasons, was U.S. support for Israel, which preceded the first Gulf War. We've been supporting Israel since they formed back in, what, 48? All right. So, the first Gulf War gave us the war on terror. It gave us 9/11. And then Bush and his administration with Cheney and Rumsfeld and the other assholes, lying son of bitches, right? They took the war on terror, the 9/11 attack, and they used that. They used the attack by Al Qaeda to justify an attack upon Iraq. And remember Richard Clark, the anti-terror czar, saying, under Clinton and Bush, saying, after 9/11, for the U.S. to go invade Iraq is like after Pearl Harbor when the Japanese attacked us, right? For us to go and say, whoa, what the hell should we do? Oh, I don't know. I know. Let's go invade Mexico. And they sold this to the American public. So then we got Gulf War II. We got the invasion of Iraq. Right? Now, one aspect of the Iraq invasion war, Gulf War II, was further privatization of war. So the first Gulf War represented privatization of war, taken away from the military, putting it in private hands, right? Big private profits. So the second Gulf War, again, was big log cap. Halliburton got the overall contract. Every dollar that went to logistics, Halliburton got its cut. Even if all they did is to dole it out to a subcontractor. Plus, now, they got involved through KBR with private military security contractors. That's privatized war fighting. That's mercenaries. And mercenaries are shit compared to the U.S. military. But they're big money makers. All right, KBR is a subsidiary of Halliburton. Halliburton, Dresser Industries. Dresser Industries, Brown Brothers Harriman Bank. All the damn bonesmen. All right. Now, what good was the second Gulf War? Oh, it greatly increased the terrorist threat. Oh, it created ISIS. Oh, it destabilized the Middle East. Oh, it unleashed sectarian civil war between Sunni and Shia. Not just in Iraq, but throughout the region. Especially now in Syria. I taught you how the second Gulf War created that Shia bloc. Iran, Iraq, Syria, which greatly increased the conflict between Shia and Sunnis, the Sunni bloc to the south. All right. Now, as far as this war increasing terrorism and creating ISIS, I taught you how this occurred in this diagram. I'm not going to even attempt to try to teach this all again. It's very involved and complex, but I showed you step by step how the U.S. invasion of Iraq, right, and all the screwed up Bush administration policies. I mean, the Bush administration policies were a perfect recipe of screwing up that war, of creating a mess in Iraq, of creating chaos in Iraq, of creating insurgency, of creating radicalization, of creating terrorists. Everything they did, it was like perfectly designed to do that. De-Ba'athification, eliminating the military, on and on and on. Right? We created ISIS, our detention centers, Bush definition of torture and humiliation, unleashing crazy humiliation and torture, which played a big role in radicalizing these sons of bitches. And then we got to fight them as ISIS. That's just smart. That is totally anti-strategic. Any military mind, any military strategist will say, that's just crazy stupid what they did. It's not rocket scientists. It's not rocket science. Well, maybe for the average person who understands zero about military theory. Literally, the average person understands zero. I mean, I'm not exaggerating. All right. So, what are some common denominators? Bonesmen. Everything in gray. Bonesmen starting these damn wars. Bonesmen all fucking around. War. Bonesmen in war. U.S. 20th century and 21st century wars. Banking. Brown Brothers Harriman. Union Banking Corporation. Military industries. KBR, Halliburton, Root Brown, Dresser Industries, Brown Brothers Harriman. Military industry, oil. And these neocons, like Dick Cheney, like Rumsfeld, like Wolfowitz. Remember I told you, it's federal government, but it's also career bureaucrats. And they're often more important. They're the henchmen doing the groundwork. Doing the nuts and bolts, get us into this war. Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, Cheney, Condoleezza fucking Rice. All right. So World War I gave us a birth of the military-industrial complex. It started here. The potential started with the fourth stage of the Industrial Revolution, machine manufactured weapons, but the military-industrial complex did not take off until many years later. So this is about 100 years later. 1820, 1917 is when we got, 1914 is when the money started rolling in. Big money rolled in with World War I. So the big money maker in the 19th century was Western expansion and railroads. And who dominated that? Well, a key guy was E.H. Harriman. Well, in the 20th century, the big money maker became military industry. Who dominated that? Averell Harriman. E.H. Harriman's son. These guys knew what the big money maker was. And they jumped all over it. All right. Now, in this diagram, I'm gonna go further in developing how these guys, these bonesmen, are all related, interconnected. But I'll save this for a separate lecture, especially since my voice is starting to go right now. And now I'll wrap it up here with some summary statements. Okay, that's it for that lecture.